Our ship to, with a wind from the southwest, we hove our ship to, for the strike soundings clear. For our captains commanded, we sail for New England, and we hope in a short time to see those we hold dear. We'll rant and we'll roar like New Bedford whalers. We'll rant and we'll roar on deck and below until we sight the New Bedford light. Then straight down the channel to anchor we'll go. So often when I heard that song as the sailors would sing it, I would long for my home port of New Bedford, even as I was enjoying the many pleasures of our voyage at sea. But I get ahead of myself. My name is Mary Chipman Lawrence, and the voyage of which I speak is one that I made with my husband, Captain Samuel Lawrence, and our young daughter, Minnie, many years ago, a whaling voyage in the Pacific. I have been reminiscing about my adventure just today as I pulled my journal that I kept from a drawer where it was tucked away. I have been poring over this and remembering all the wonderful times that I had. It seems like not that long ago that I made this first entry on this fresh page in a fresh journal. As this is my first experience in seafaring life, I have thought it advisable to attempt keeping a journal, not for the purpose of interesting anyone out of my own private family, but thinking it might be useful to myself or my child for future reference. We left New Bedford on the morning of the 25th of November, 1856, with a sad heart, not knowing whether we should ever behold the faces of friends near and dear to us again on this earth. God grant that we may all meet in that better land where the parting tear is never shed, the word goodbye never spoken. We had a good wind from the eastward and a fine sail down the bay out into the wide ocean, which is to be my home for months and years to come. Went on deck before dark to take my last look at my native land. With what different feeling shall I behold it, should I be permitted to return? Samuel and I had only been married a few years when we set sail, and many of those years we were much apart while he was away. I would have loved to have stayed just 2 more days and just enjoy one more Thanksgiving with family and friends around the table. But, as I was soon to learn, personal desires most often gave way to dictates of ship and schedules. Just 20 years earlier, it would have been unusual to find a wife and family aboard a ship. But times were changing, and more wives and families were accompanying their captain husbands. It was either that or suffer months and years in the hardships of being apart, of a wife not knowing until many months afterwards that she was a widow, or a husband returning to home port to find an empty place around his table. So too, ship owners and captains were coming to realize the benefit of having a family and a wife on board. It had a calming effect sometimes upon the crew. And also a wife could help out in some ways with mending and sewing and tending to the sick and such. Sometimes the roles that they played were even more critical, as in the case of Mary Patton. Mary and her husband had set sail the same year that Samuel and I did. In earlier voyages, Mary had learned from her husband the art of navigation, little imagining how she would be called upon to use it under such dire circumstances. When they were out from port only a day or two, the captain discovered that he could not trust his first mate, and so he had him confined below. Soon after, the captain, her husband, fell gravely ill, and Mary took over navigation of the ship. The first mate tried to convince the crew to mutiny and let him out, but they stood by her. After a bit, her husband recovered to some degree, and he relented and let the first mate out. Well, within a day or two, he found that they were far off course, and it was the first mate's doing, and so he had him reconfined. After that, he had a relapse, and Mary, 19 and pregnant, took over navigation of the ship and brought her around Cape Horn and into San Francisco Bay, where she was met with great celebrity, and the ship owners gave her an extra $1,000 for her bravery. I can claim no such valor, but I would like to think that the ship and crew and my husband were the better for my presence, and that our daughter, Minnie, was afforded the experience of a lifetime by accompanying us. While I willingly took to the sea, I did relish the opportunities to both write home as well as hear from home. Sometimes a ship that had left after us would bring along letters from family and friends, and sometimes a ship that was leaving for home port before we would be able to take some of our ship letters and send them home. How well I remember on January 2nd, when I wrote, "I have been writing letters today to have on hand in case we should see an opportunity to send home. I have 3 on hand now, 1 for my mother, 1 for Thomas and Mercy, and 1 for James and Anna. I hope they may depart speedily. We see vessels at a distance every day. I delight to watch them as they gallantly pursue their way over the boundless ocean. We are now enjoying moonlit evenings, and there were never any more lovely, I think. There are several fine voices forward. I have yet to find out that sailors belong to another class than that of human beings. I hope I may be fortunate enough to remain in ignorance of the fact by my own experience. I tell Samuel that I shall not think they are entirely depraved as long as I hear them singing their psalms." Although the singing I refer to in this entry is one of a religious nature, as often as not, I heard them singing their sea shanties. Some of them, and the lyrics of some of them were, well, beyond what I would consider proper. But there were others of which I became quite fond and even jotted the lyrics down of some. And sometimes on a sunny afternoon or a moonlit evening, I would stroll the deck and hum and sing to myself. "O Shenandoah, I long to hear you, away, you rolling river. O Shenandoah, I long to hear you, away, we're bound away, across the wide Missouri. O Shenandoah, I love your daughter, away, you rolling river. O Shenandoah, across the water, away, we're bound away, across the wide Missouri. Missouri, she's a mighty river, away, you rolling river. When she rolls down, her topsails shiver. Away, we're bound away, across the wide Missouri. For 7 long years I've courted Sally, away, you rolling river. In 7 more I hope we'll marry. Away, we're bound away, across the wide Missouri. Missouri, I'm bound to leave you, away, you rolling river. Oh, Shenandoah, I'll not deceive you, away, we're bound
across the wide Missouri.
Of course, the purpose of our voyage was to hunt whales. And on January 13th, I recorded our first encounter. Saw whales this morning. I heard the sound and thought I would go on deck. If there was a whale to be seen, thought I would like to see it. I went, and very soon I saw him blow and then saw the monster turn flukes. He was a formidable creature indeed. The three mates went off in their boats. Samuel remained on board as there was a squall coming up. How thankful I felt. I almost dreaded seeing whales, as I feared I should feel badly having him go off for the first time before I became accustomed to it. They stayed out until about noon. The whales got out of their way, so they returned to the ship. Just as we had seated ourselves at the dinner table, the cry of, "There blows!" was heard again. They all left the table with a rush. I thought I might as well finish dinner, as I could do no good, so Minnie and myself remained at the table. The three mates went first, then soon after Samuel went with his boat's crew. I saw him go off without fear and wished him good luck. Presently they told me that one of the boats had fastened. We watched them along, but the whale continued to spout. After a while, one of the boats started for the ship. When he arrived, we found it was Mr. Baxter with his boat stoven. That meant it was smashed in. Just as he got on board, there was a cry, "Another boat stoven!" I looked and saw an empty boat. I had not the heart to ask whose boat it was, but went down into the cabin. I could stand it no longer. I comforted myself by thinking if anyone was hurt, they would proceed immediately to the ship. I never was more rejoiced than when I heard Samuel's voice again as he came near the ship with some of Mr. St. John's crew. His boat was stoven, and they were all thrown into the water. The other two boats picked them up. How it must have dampened the enthusiasm of the new beginners. Samuel came back to alter the course of the ship, hoping he might recover the stoven boat, in which he was successful. As soon as he arrived, he sent Mr. Baxter off again in his boat. They all remained off as long as they could see, then were reluctantly obliged to cut from the whale, though not until another boat had been stowed. Thus ended our first day's experience. They are in hopes of getting him yet. They think with so many irons he must die. I hope they will. We ought to have him to pay for our stoven boats. Thus my first taste of the hunt for whales, with the excitement, the frustration, the danger, the exhilaration. We brought with us much in the way of food, including live animals and chickens for eggs and such. Minnie almost always had a pet of one kind or another. She started with a cat and went on from there. Also, the crew brought off the side of the ship sometimes some sort of fish, which added to our dining pleasure, and we were quite happy. Well, except for one of these instances that I wrote down here where the results were, well, not quite so favorable. March 19th. Had some of those pilot fish fried for supper last night and the rest for breakfast this morning. They tasted very nice. Nicer than they ever will again to us, I fancy. About 10 minutes after I had finished my breakfast, my face began to burn and my head to ache badly. I looked in the glass and my face was a sight to behold, just as red as it could be all over. Chin, forehead, ears, neck. I lay down upon the sofa and my head ached so that I could not get up to ring the bell for Samuel. Presently he came down, and of all the looking creatures that I ever saw, his face was fairly purple. Said I, "What is the matter?" He replied, "I did not know what was the matter with me until I saw you. Now I know that we are poisoned by eating those fish after they had been kept overnight." At that time, Mr. Nickerson came down. He had been aloft. He did not know what was the matter with him, but he felt so badly he did not dare to stay up any longer. So it went on, one came down after another, until all who had eaten them felt the consequences. Now the very sight of a pilot fish is enough to make us sick. After nearly 5 months at sea, we reached Maui and settled for a short time in the village of Lahaina. What a pleasure it was to set foot on land again after so many months at sea, and to anticipate the pleasure of some female company. I remember well when I sat down on April 18th, 1857 in the journal. We are very pleasantly situated in a straw cottage on the shore, surrounded by trees, with walks laid out and bordered with flowers. It is a bachelor's establishment, but looks very much as if it had a presiding genius. Mr. Gilman has a native cook and a native woman to take care of the house. The house contains 4 rooms, a sitting room, 2 bedrooms, and a dining room. There is crimson and white drapery, straw matting upon the floors, Chinese chairs and lounges, and a whatnot filled with Japanese curiosities, and the walls are hung round with paintings and engravings. My idea of straw houses were small huts with no windows and a hole made for the door. A little girl, Lizzie Bigelow, called this morning to see Minnie, and Mrs. Bigelow and Mrs. Brayton called this afternoon. Was much interested in the native church service. Had very excellent singing. Of course, we could understand nothing that was said, but from the gestures of the preacher, we could imagine some of the tenor of his discourse. I was much amused at the appearance of the natives. Their dresses of whatever material, from coarse calico to the richest silk, are made like a nightgown. They are much pleased to see strangers in their church. They all turned and gazed upon me to their heart's content. I bore their scrutiny, I flatter myself, with very good grace. Some appeared quite interested in the remarks of the preacher, others were not very attentive. I confess that I am disappointed in the appearance of the natives. They are not nearly so far advanced in civilization as I had supposed. The good folks at home pretend to hold them up as a model from which we would all do well to copy. I do not doubt but that there has been a great deal done for them, but there is a vast deal more to be done to raise them very high in the scale of morals. From what I saw and heard of them, they are a low, degraded, and indolent set. They have no apartments in their houses, all huddled together. Many of them go without clothing. Both sexes bathe in the water entirely naked and unabashed. As I am writing, 2 men are close by my door without an article of clothing. Minnie says I have to turn my head the other way. There are but very few that can be depended upon, even members of the church. They will lie and steal whenever an opportunity offers. I am aware that the foreign influence, especially of sailors, has been very bad, but they are very far from what I expected to find them. I look back now on my naivete regarding humanity with a more practiced eye. But then, I wrote, saw several sailors pass who told me that one of our number had been taken to the fort for drinking and being unruly in the street. It made me feel very badly. I thought better things of them. But my husband has always told me that sailors would be sailors and that after we had been in port, my eyes would be opened. I am fearful that it is so. It would seem that the sailors failed to learn the lessons of the very sea shanties which they sang all day. Sea shanties like this one. In Amsterdam there dwells a maid, mark well what I do say. In Amsterdam there dwells a maid, and she is mistress of her trade. I'll go no more a-roving with you, fair maid. A-roving, since roving's been my ruin. I'll go no more a-roving with you, fair maid. I took the maiden for a walk, mark well what I do say. I took the maiden for a walk, and sweet and loving was her talk. I'll go no more a-roving with you, fair maid. A-roving, since roving's been my ruin. I'll go no more a-roving with you, fair maid. Her eyes are blue, her cheeks are red, mark well what I do say. Her eyes are blue, her cheeks are red, a wealth of hair is on her head. I'll go no more a-roving with you, fair maid, a-roving, since roving's been my ruin. I'll go no more a-roving with you, fair maid. I put my arm around her waist, mark well what I do say. I put my arm around her waist, says she, young man, you're in some haste. I'll go no more a-roving with you, fair maid, a-roving, since roving's been my ruin. I'll go no more a-roving with you, fair maid. I took that girl upon my knee, mark well what I do say. I took that girl upon my knee, says she, young man, you're rather free. I'll go no more a-roving with you, fair maid, a-roving, since roving's been my ruin. I'll go no more a-roving with you, fair maid. She swore that she'd be true to me, mark well what I do say. She swore that she'd be true to me, but spent my money both fast and free. I'll go no more a-roving with you, fair maid, a-roving, since roving's been my ruin. I'll go no more a-roving with you, fair maid. In 3 weeks' time I was badly bent, mark well what I do say. In 3 weeks' time I was badly bent, then off to sea I sadly went. I'll go no more a-roving with you, fair maid, a-roving, since roving's been my ruin. I'll go no more a-roving with you, fair maid. I was to learn the frailty of humanity, but I was also to see the great courage that could be demonstrated in times of crisis. In short, I was able to observe the wide breadth of the human experience, much more so, I believe, than had I stayed ashore. We left the islands heading north for Kodiak. And as we headed north, it got colder and colder. We were obliged to set up our little cabin stove in the cabin to stay warm. It was at that time, too, that the first slop cask was opened, and a very brisk business was done from that slop cask. Slop casks were filled with items that sailors would need: warm clothes, outerwear, shoes, knives, and other such items. The agreement was that sailors could draw from these slop casks, and at the end of the voyage, whatever they had drawn would be counted against their final pay. Unfortunately, some of them drew so heavily that they ended up owing the ship money rather than the other way around. When we arrived in the Arctic in Bristol Bay, at first we encountered no luck. Nothing in sight that lives. Our company were beginning to feel rather down again when the cry of "right whales" resounded from the masthead. The boats were lowered, and about 8 o'clock got a whale alongside. Commenced cutting him in immediately as the barometer gave indications of another gale. Arose this morning and found ourselves in a city of ships. Could count 15 from off the deck. Some were boiling, some cutting in, and others chasing whales. It seems very lively and pleasant. Our boats lowered for a whale in the forenoon, killed a very large one which sunk, but 3 boats being fast to him, they succeeded after some time in pulling him up again, much to our satisfaction. All hands were up through the night cutting in the whale. By September, we had finished stowing an additional 300 barrels of whale oil on top of the 550 we had already collected. In addition, we had a goodly amount of whalebone. In the 1850s, a woman's costume, with all the corseting and the farthingales and such, required a good amount of whalebone, and so it was very much in demand and commanded a very good price of $1.50 per pound. Sometimes we were able to send some of the oil in the barrels and some of the whalebone home by another ship that was returning before we would be returning. After the first foray into the Arctic, we returned to Honolulu for a brief respite. It was very pleasant to anticipate, once again, enjoying a bit of female company. It was at that time that I visited the Sailors' Home, the Falmouth Ladies Seamen's Friend Association had done sewing and had provided bedding and a Bible and a picture of our minister and some money for additional comforts. And we had sent it all to this Sailors' Home all the way over in Honolulu. I recorded visiting that Sailors' Home thus. Visited the Sailors' Home. I received many thanks for the society in Falmouth, of which I am a member, for furnishing the room which goes by that name. It was called the Falmouth Room, the one that we furnished, being the first which was furnished by people at a distance. Mrs. Thrum, the lady of the house, thanked me, while tears were streaming down her cheeks, to think that ladies so far off across the wide ocean should sit and sew for them that they might be enabled to make a comfortable home for the sailor. I was much pleased with what I saw there, and it appeared to be, as its name would indicate, a home for the sailor. When we had been out exactly 1 year, I had been recording our daily mileage, and after a year, we had covered 37,000 miles. Over the time that we were in the Pacific, our voyages followed a pattern. When it was summertime, in the southern hemisphere, we would head to the Marquesas or New Zealand, or 1 year we went to California. When it was summer in the northern hemisphere, we would head out into the Arctic. In between times, we would stop at Honolulu or Maui or some such place to take on supplies, do any repairs, and be warm for a little bit and have some company, and also be able to send some letters, hopefully pick up some of the letters that had been waiting for us there. On holidays, we did our best to engage Megan and to make it a festive atmosphere for her. Christmas Day reminds us of home and friends. Minnie wished to hang up her stocking as usual. Grandpa had made some candies for us. We sat down to a Christmas dinner of 2 roast turkeys, sweet and Irish potatoes, boiled onions, stewed pumpkin and cranberries, pickles, and a nice Indian pudding made of real milk and eggs. Had a goat killed for the benefit of those living in the forecastle, to which I should think they did ample justice, as there are but 2 legs remaining. Those were happy and content times, but as we all knew, the business of whaling is a dangerous business indeed. And only a few days later, tragedy struck. December 28th. Saw whales before breakfast. Immediately after breakfast, lowered the boats. Mr. Nickerson's boat soon got fast to one when he capsized the boat and precipitated them all into the water. Mr. St. John, with the waste boat, immediately went to the rescue. Before he reached them, one poor fellow had found a watery grave. He said he could not swim, so Mr. Nickerson gave him an oar that he might keep himself up, but we think he must have had the cramp and let go his hold on the oar. Poor Antone. He came as one of the cabin boys and had lived in the cabin for over a year. Then at his own request had gone to live in the forecastle. He was so anxious to go out in a boat after whales. He was a smart, active boy of 18 years, and I had become quite attached to him. Only the week before, I had proposed to Samuel that we should take him home with us and give him the benefit of a little education. That was a sad day for us, Antone, when thou was summoned into the mysteries of the unseen world without a moment's warning. May God in his infinite goodness have mercy on thy soul. The sad events of the day have made me almost sick, so I took a cup of tea by myself and went early to bed. Other mishaps may befall a ship, as my husband all too well knew. At the beginning of his career, he had charge of the whaling ship Lafayette. When he was bringing the ship in to anchorage off of the Galapagos Islands, they struck a rock. and it went down. And that was nearly the end of his sailing career right there. This could happen all too easily, as I recorded on June 17, 1858, while we were cruising in Arctic waters. A sad accident happened to us this morning. In a thick snowstorm, we hit a lone cake of ice. No one saw it, neither had any been seen during the morning. We were not aware that there were any within 6 miles at least. The first thing I did was to get Minnie up and dress her. We were at breakfast, and I generally let Minnie sleep in the morning as we breakfast early. I was very calm and composed while dressing her and was ready to collect my things preparatory to leaving the ship, as I expected we should be obliged to do. The ship was stoven some on her bow, causing her to leak a little. But Samuel thinks when he can get up to the land and into a bay where we can anchor, we can repair her a little, and it will be perfectly safe to continue on whale ground for the season. Captains Freeman of the Tybee and Smith of the Fabius were on board during the day, and they considered that it was perfectly safe to do so. I believe I am truly thankful that it is no worse, and I retire to rest with a feeling of gratitude that the Addison is still my home. There are plenty of ships in sight, and I know that I should suffer for nothing, but for Samuel's sake especially am I thankful. The Arctic waters were fairly new territory in the 1850s for whaling. In this particular song that I remember so well, a sailor is encouraging his captain to go north in search of bowhead whales. Some of the southern whales had the reputation of being rather feistier and more aggressive, and the bowheads a bit more docile and easy to catch. Far, far up to the Arctic Ocean, where the bowheads blow, that's why my mind am turning ever, that's where I want to go. All this ocean am sad and dreary, everywhere we stray. Oh, Captain, will you go to that ocean, go where the bowheads lay? All these whales are wild and ugly, all those that we see. Oh, Captain, will you go to that ocean, go where the bowheads be? All up and down the sea we've wandered since I've been with you. Then, Captain, let us go to the northward, then we will see something new. All the whales that are in this ocean, all are wild we see. Then, Captain, will you go to the northward, go where the bowheads be? When shall I see the hills and valleys far on the northwest shore? Oh, Captain, let us leave this ocean and not stray here any more. All this ocean am sad and dreary, everywhere we stray. Oh, Captain, will you go to that ocean, go where the bowheads lay? One of the most interesting aspects of our voyage were all the different various peoples that we met. I remember another situation here that I recorded on a later visit to Lahaina. The king and suite, that's the king of the Sandwich Islands, were to leave the same time in the schooner Maria, and as that ship's accommodations were so small, Samuel was asked to take a few, the governor and some of his attendants, on board the Addison, which he consented to do. When we arrived on board, we found hardly room for the soles of our feet on deck. The governor and Princess Victoria, father and sister of the present king, were on board with their train of attendants, numbering in all about 90 souls. Each one with a trunk, chest, box, his dishes of poi, and a huge pile of sugar cane beside him. On either side of the deck were 2 large lounges with canopies for the governor and princess, with velvet coverings, pillows, and embroidered pillowcases. Each one was furnished with a calabash containing some fragrant herb, which was used for a spittoon. Equally interesting were the people that we encountered when we went north and into the Arctic. I remember one particular instance when some of our crew made an exploratory trip to land. They found that the natives were away at that time on a walrus hunt, but when they returned, they came aboard our ship. The men were short and thick-set and had yellow complexions and high cheekbones. Their hair was black and was shaved very close on the side and then left longer on the top. They had never seen anything like Minnie and myself, and they stared and stared. Later, when one of their kind, a female, came on board, well, she was dressed and looked very similar. I had, all during our voyage, reason to rejoice for our relative good health. We had the occasional cold or mild fever, but nothing very serious. I do remember, though, leaving Honolulu and congratulating myself on having yet once again avoided the dreaded boohoo fever which most foreigners fall prey to sooner or later. Well, we were only out of port 1 or 2 days when, sure enough, I came down with it. It is not serious for the most part, but it is terribly uncomfortable, and I took to my bed for over a week before I had recovered. While death and illness were part of our story, so too were some amusing situations, such as this one that I recorded. About a week ago, the steward throwed all the teaspoons we used for breakfast overboard in his dishwater. Samuel reproved him for his carelessness, but as he had not been at sea for some years, thought not much about it. We managed to find just enough to set the table with, and this morning, he did the same thing again. So now, we have 1 teaspoon left. And that does execution for us all as a public stirrer. Samuel using it first, then I take it, then the mate, and so on down. It caused us a great deal of merriment at the table, but really, I think it is no laughing matter. What we shall do when we have company is what troubles me. And then I recorded another mishap when we were on our way home. Strong breezes with a heavy sea, the usual accompaniment here. From New Zealand to Cape Horn is a long, tedious route, especially at this season of the year. As we were to have roast pork for dinner, I thought I would have a luxury in the shape of stewed apples for sauce, as we had a few apples left from when we went apple picking on New Zealand. So I prepared them, sent and borrowed a saucepan of the cook, stewed them very nicely, sweetened them, and was just preparing to take them up when there came an extra roll from the deep, which was a little more than I could manage, and my applesauce was spattered all around on the cabin floor, and the saucepan flew into the pantry. Consequently, our dinner was eaten, minus the apple. You might be surprised to learn that a whaling cruise could offer much opportunity for sociability. Certainly, we had weeks at sea, weeks of solitude. But then, too, there were many opportunities on New Zealand or in the Sandwich Islands. When we would go to shore, there would be opportunities for carriage rides and teas and suppers and the like. With so many whalers and packet ships and other ships plying the ocean, we made many friends which we would encounter again and again, and we also made new ones along the way too. Even in the heat of a whale hunt, there was opportunity for, well, what the sailors call gamming, or getting close enough to a ship so that they could socialize and talk a bit. Sometimes Samuel would go aboard another ship and spend the afternoon or evening, or we would entertain a captain or even a captain and his family, or perhaps we would go aboard another ship. Minnie was especially happy if there was a young son or daughter for her to play with. I welcomed the opportunity for a bit of female company, and apparently I was not the only one, as I recorded in this entry. Saw 3 ships gamming, one of which was the Rebecca Sims. After tea, we went down to them, and Samuel went on board the Rebecca Sims, where the captains had congregated. Very soon he came back, however, not meeting with a very cordial reception, for the captains wanted to come here, where the lady was. They came back with him, and we passed a very pleasant evening. When we tried our luck off of California, there was a great many ships and quite a few excursions. One in particular I recorded, which I will remember, and I hope Minnie will remember forever as a very fond memory. Today we went on shore and had a picnic. Captain Weeks, his wife and 2 children, and Captain May with his son joined us. Started about 9 o'clock in the morning. We took our steward with us, and Captain Weeks took his cook. Carried bread, crackers, cake, cookies, and pies with us. After we arrived there, kindled a fire and made a quahog chowder and stewed some birds for dinner. We had plenty of coffee and beer also. The captains went a little further up the lagoon to go fishing. We had an abundance of oysters all around us, growing on the trees, and the empty shells all around us showed them that we did them justice. We would have a tree cut down and thrown across the fire until the oysters were sufficiently roasted, then take the tree off and commence operations. Each child having a separate fire and roasting their own oysters. It was a pleasant day of their lives and one long to be remembered. It is a barren country, nothing growing except sandflowers, which were very pretty, and cactus plants. It was on these excursions that Minnie and I collected flowers to press and seashells. While we were away, I made sure to keep Minnie up on her studies, reading and writing and such. She also worked on things like learning fine needlework. She made this dress for her doll during the voyage. One of the sailors took some of those shells that we collected and made her this for a gift for her birthday one year. The sailors were good to Minnie. They made her things like this clever puzzle, which I don't dare take apart for fear she'll never get it back together. They also played along with her April Fool's pranks and such. I found them to be, on whole, a good lot, good-hearted men. I still think sometimes of the songs that they sang, of which I was so fond, some of them. I loved this one especially because it reminded me of home. It's of the gold rush, and it's set out of Salem Port. That was not very far from New Bedford. Oh, I come from Salem City with my washbowl on my knee. I'm going to California, the gold dust for to see. It rained all night the day I left, the weather it was dry. The sun so hot I froze to death, oh brothers don't you cry. California, that's the land for me. I'm bound for San Francisco with my washbowl on my knee. I jumped aboard the Liza ship and traveled on the sea. And every time I thought of home, I wished it weren't me. The vessel reared like any horse that had of oats o' wealth. I found it wouldn't throw me, so I thought I'd throw myself. California, that's the land for me. I'm bound for San Francisco with my washbowl on my knee. I thought of all the pleasant times we've had together here. I thought I ought to cry a bit, but I couldn't shed a tear. The pilot bread was in my mouth, the gold dust in my eye. And though I'm going far away, oh brothers, don't you cry. California, that's the land for me. I'm bound for San Francisco with my washbowl on my knee. I soon shall be in Frisco, boys, and there I'll look around. And when I see the lumps of gold, I'll pick them off the ground. I'll scrape the mountains clean, my boys, I'll drain the rivers dry. And a pocket full of rocks bring home, so brothers, don't you cry. California, that's the place for me. There's plenty of gold, so I've been told, by the far Pacific Sea. After 3.5 years away, we returned to our home port in June of 1860. War was on the horizon, and by the next year, I was knitting stockings and collecting bandages for the war effort. Samuel took a job as a steamship transport captain. Whaling, large-scale whaling, declined rapidly and greatly. Petroleum was taking over, replacing whale oil. And so too, the government purchased a great many whale ships and sunk them at the entrance to the harbors of Savannah and Charleston. After the war, Samuel continued on as a steamship transport captain. He moved first to New Jersey and now to Brooklyn, where we live. When we left the Pacific, headed for home, I made this journal entry. We left Honolulu for the last time, on this voyage at least. I did not know then that there would not be another voyage. But the friends that we made, the boundless ocean glittering under a noonday sun or sparkling with a full moon, the wonderful sights that we saw, and the people that we met, those memories have lasted me a lifetime. Thank you.